Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, where we document every little detail about public opinion for the upcoming 2024 presidential election. And the first thing I want to say that we're basically the only place on the internet where you're going to hear directly from the pollster about the content of their polling, every little nuance and detail, right as we get the numbers, except that is for our friend Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. Now, we're out there polling every day, but we decided that we needed to bring our information to you directly because the industry is actively attempting to cancel us. We were removed from the ABC News 538 aggregate just this year for basically asking questions that people thought were the wrong kind of questions. Questions about topics like election integrity, which everyone cares about, vaccine safety, which everyone should also care about, things like the weaponization of our justice system, and even some questions that are uncomfortable about the man in office. Every other channel you follow on YouTube is basically going to be trying to make calls by looking at the aggregate of all polling on 538. Many pollsters only release monthly, and their data could be 3-4 weeks old by the time it hits the press. But some of the numbers that we're going to talk about today are just from last night. So follow us on YouTube if you want to hear directly from the horse's mouth what's happening in this race. And today we're going to be talking about the implications of the Trump guilty verdict, the short and long-term implications. And we talked about this last week, but we have some fresh new numbers to look at. What you're looking at here is the daily snapshot of presidential approval that we put out every day. And as of last night, Joe Biden's approval rate is 44%, which is up from 42% just a week ago. Now, that 44% is not high, but it's pretty high for Joe Biden recently, and a 2-point swing is meaningful. But what's interesting is despite the fact that the GOP approval of Biden went down from 16 points a week ago to now 13 points, he picked up 5 points of Democrat approval, which is significant, and another 3 points of independent approval, bringing him from 37% to 40%. Although you'll also notice that his strongly approved number, 23%, did not change, and strongly disapprove went up 1 point. So Joe Biden definitely got a bump because of this verdict, but the bump didn't go any higher than 2 points. And what's probably going to happen is his numbers are going to peter off. I can already start to see it happen. So in the grand scheme of things, that's kind of insignificant, especially since you consider that for most of the last 3 years of Trump's term, his approval rating fluctuated between 48% and 50%. Joe Biden is structurally a much lower approval president than Donald Trump. You'll also notice here that white and black approval popped up 2 points and 4 points respectively, but Hispanic and other race approval stayed about the same. Now, in the last video, we compared recent numbers to numbers from the middle of May, and that was specifically to show that the right track, wrong direction numbers had gone up quite a bit from the high 20s to the low 30s, and it was driven almost entirely by Democrats. Back in the middle of May, Democrats were split 46% to 46% on whether the country was on the right track or headed in the wrong direction. Now, a week ago, before the guilty verdict came out, Democrats actually got up to 54% at one point and were then at 51% to 42%, which is a big swing since the middle of May. But they were the ones watching the trial most closely, and I think they had kind of an expectation about what was going to happen when the verdict was read. But now, if you look at it, they're back down to 49, 43%, headed again back to that, mean reversion of probably 46% to 46%. That'll bring right track back under 30, where it's been for most of Biden's term. And that is absolutely horrible because for Trump, even at the height of the COVID pandemic in May and June of 2020, right direction, wrong track was pretty stable in the high 30s. Now, we would actually expect the numbers to swing quite a bit in a hotly contested race. But believe it or not, Trump's lead has been range bound to about 8 to 10% for pretty much this entire year. I never expected it to be that high headed into the fall, and we see a drop, which I'm going to get into. But I want to talk about public opinion and how it changes. Public opinion, at least as measured by polls, can change quite a few ways. Probably the two biggest numerical levers are we can shift our weighting or we can change the way or the places that we collect our data from. But as far as people actually answering different, I think the two biggest levers are, one, people's feelings change. They get enthused, they get dismayed, they get frustrated. They may decide not to pick up a phone call or they may decide in our likely voter screen to say they're going to sit out the election. And then the mix of people in our polling will change. And I think that that's probably the biggest short-term effect and what's driving all of the changes that we're going to see today. The other is people actually changing their mind. And I think that's something that, although it could change rapidly, tends to change a lot slower. I think one of the things that changed people's minds pretty big about Joe Biden wasn't his colossal screw up in Afghanistan. It's the weeks of people chanting FJB in stadiums across the country. That affects people bit by bit. And I think one of the things that you're going to see affect people's opinions now is obviously stuff like what happened at that UFC fight this week with the Strickland endorsement, but also things like people getting disgusted still today in 2024 with coverage from CNN and MSNBC and tuning out and finding alternative news sources. And over time, some of those people's opinions also get changed. But let's get to the matchup numbers. Here are numbers from May 23rd, just a little over a week ago, where we had a really solid Trump 10-point lead over Joe Biden, 49% to 39%. This is the one we talked about on our interview on War Room. And if you missed it, you're going to have to go to Rumble because YouTube literally just will not let us post anything at all with Steve Bannon. And this one was pretty historic because we showed Trump winning the black vote by 1 point. Now, obviously, that was an outlier data point that we probably expect to swing back, but still pretty crazy. And also notice here that Trump is winning by 3 points among 18 to 39-year-old voters, which is also a really big deal. But here are the numbers that we're releasing today from May 28th to May 30th. And one of the 3 nights happened after the verdict. And all 3 of them happened after the defense closed its case, which means that the trial was in the news big time. And here Donald Trump's lead is down to just 5 points. 48% to 43%, he's beating Joe Biden now. Now, a lot of people you're going to hear say that, wow, Trump is going to win by a landslide now. And, that's kind of an unnuanced way to look at this. The Democrats got their scalp. They're really happy. Look at Democrat Joe Biden approval. It's pretty much as high as it's been for 3 years. We expect this kind of surge for Biden. Now, long term, like I said, there may be positive implications for Trump. Like, look at his fundraising numbers. Just the amount of money he raised because of this trial will change more people's opinions in the future that might not have otherwise been changed. And then there's all kinds of stuff, like maybe this whole outlaw presidency thing, will rally people. But what we can do is look demographic by demographic at what changes happened just in a week. Here's Trump's lead on May 23rd, and here's Trump's lead on May 30th. And this column here is the difference. So we're going to go demographic by demographic and look at the differences. Male voters haven't changed their opinions, but women voters now are a lot more supportive of Biden. They went from 39% to 45%, and Trump support went from 48% down to 44%. Now, these numbers, again, will fluctuate, but the male ones didn't, and the female ones did big. That's an important point. But here's what's interesting. Biden and Trump each improved their chances a little bit with 18 to 39-year-olds, but it was a total wash, no overall change. And it was also a wash with older voters, 65 and over. So basically, all of the movement happened with middle-aged voters. And Biden went from 39% to 45%, but Trump went down 53% to 46%. So women and middle-aged voters. And here's race, and Trump had a pretty big hit among white voters, again, mostly probably driven by women. But look at that black voter number, 21% less support. But I think that's just the numbers reverting to the mean. This still has Trump taking 37% of the black vote, which would be a historic victory for him. And it's actually been in line where I think all of our polling has been this cycle. The last time we ran this, before these results here, I think it was black 55% Biden to 35% Trump. But the Hispanic voters are pretty based, an absolute wash. So this verdict had no impact whatsoever for them. But here's the big news. Okay, the black voters, I understand. We expected that kind of movement. But really, the biggest change is coming from Democrat voters. And again, this fits with the message that I've been telling you about Biden approval. Democrats are overjoyed right now that they got a scalp, and Trump's crossover advantage among Democrats is now almost completely gone. 71% of Democrats say they would vote for Joe Biden. Just a week ago, it's up to 82%. And Trump had 19 back then. It's down to 14%. So total, that's, with a rounding, a 17-point swing. Really big. Now, Trump also lost some Republicans. He went from 87% to 84%. There are Nikki Haley enjoyers and never Trump Republicans that do not like this. And maybe they said they were going to vote Trump and they never were, or maybe they're saying they won't vote Trump now, but they probably will. But based on the fact that Trump had the most votes in Republican election history, I expect him to have, closer to 90% of the Republican vote as we head into the fall. But here's the interesting thing and another big takeaway. So Trump lost the most, really, among Democrat voters, but he actually gained among independents. 1% more independents would vote for Joe Biden now than a week ago, but the Trump support went from 44% to 49%. That is significant. And I threw Biden approval in here just, to highlight this. Trump lost Biden approvers big this week. And he gained amongst Joe Biden's strong disapprovers. Now, these people here would probably ultimately not vote Trump. Well, some of them may have. These people here were obviously most likely voting Trump. But this is where a lot of the impact probably came, the somewhat disapprovers. But these people are pretty wishy-washy. I'd expect their support to swing all over the place. It's probably coming back. Here are the numbers with the five-way matchup, and that's besides Biden and Trump, also including Kennedy, Cornel West, and Jill Stein. I took those two out, though, because I really wanted to get all these numbers on one page. And overall, Trump is still winning 5 points over Biden. And the difference here, the change, is from a 9-point lead a week ago down to a 5-point lead or a 4-point loss. We see the same kind of pattern with men and women. Men actually had a little bit of a pickup. And you'll also notice that Kennedy lost a point since a week ago. I think that's really significant. With Kennedy in the mix, Trump is actually doing 2 points better amongst 18 to 39-year-olds. And I do not think that's the direction the Biden campaign wants these numbers going. And really everything here is moderated a little bit. And of course, that's because the swing is 4 points, not 5 points. Same kind of pattern with black voters, a pickup with Hispanics. But again, it's Democrats really where the big loss for Trump is coming from, and the same pattern with Republican and independent voters. So let's recap the takeaways. Biden got a little bit of bounce, mostly with Democrats and some TDS independents. There are probably going to be long-term implications that this will bring in more Trump support, even if just from the amount of money he raised because of the guilty verdict. But the biggest takeaway from the matchups is that where Trump lost his most support is among Democrats. When push comes to shove, I think a self-identifying Democrat who has come to the conclusion that they're going to vote Trump and then may have abandoned him because of this might come back over the next couple of months, because let's face it, the Biden campaign hasn't gotten itself out of the situation that it's been put in, which is a pretty bad economy. Look for our new unemployment numbers this week. It's almost up to 9%. Not the official 4% number. So the economy's bad. Voters aren't happy. They think the justice system has been weaponized, and they think that Joe Biden is failing mentally. If you sign up on YouTube, you're going to see a video coming out next week that shows voters overwhelmingly think that Joe Biden is getting less and less mentally sharp. And a super strong majority of voters think the media is holding water for him to hide these failings. So Donald Trump lost most of his support among Democrats, might pick it back up, maybe never had it to begin with, but he picked up support among independent voters, and that's pretty huge. And if you've been following our channel, you're familiar with this chart. This is all of our presidential polling for the last 3 cycles, all in one place, smoothed out with a 5-period moving average. And I even put in yellow the final reported vote tallies showing that our polling was spot on. Now, this has been updated to add the 2 most recent matchup sets. And as you can see, Trump is sitting pretty comfortably about 5 points higher than he was in 2020. And Biden is sitting quite uncomfortably and also pretty stably about 10 points worse than he was doing 4 years ago. 10% Biden loss plus a 5-point Trump pickup is 15 points. And that equates to about 24 million Americans changing their minds in just 4 years. People know Trump. People know what they're getting. People know his platform. He was in office for 4 years too. He earned the name Teflon Don for a reason. I think most of those people changed their minds because a lot of them gave Biden a shot. And to them, he failed them. I think those feelings don't go away. And I think they're going to be an insurmountable headwind to Joe Biden. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like at this moment there's anybody who can bail out the Democrats. Democrats, by a majority, now want Joe Biden gone, and they can't even decide on a replacement. And trust me, we've seen this coming, and every replacement that we poll still loses to Donald Trump by just about the same, if not more, than Joe Biden does. Unfortunately for Democrats, it looks like the only option they have right now is to ratchet up attempts to take out Trump. And to me, that's what makes this cycle so unique. The palpable desperation to win at any cost, even though it's alienating voters. If you learned something here, please, again, subscribe to us on YouTube or Rumble if you want to see all our content, plus our Steve Bannon interviews. Follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll, and thanks for watching.